Rachav was the harlot who saved the lives of the two spies that Joshua sent. Her house was saved. The people in the house were saved. We can see that there were houses at the north end of the city, next to the outer wall, that remained. How come they remained? And the answer is the quake or the collapse of the walls did not affect Rachav's house. Rachav's house remained, and the two spies ran quickly to save her so that she and her family would not be attacked by the rest of the attackers. And they pulled her to safety, but her house remained. And her house, incidentally, was on the north side, closest to the hills where the spies could run to. Now, there's no way when the mound is covered, to know this, and to know that this is near the side of the mountains where they could run away. And the conversation that Rachav had with the spies was that they should run to the mountain because it was proximus to the mountain. Also, the very fact that she could put a red string and not be detected by the other people tells you that she had to be right at the wall, within the wall. She used the outer wall of the wall as her wall for her house, and she opened up a small window to be able to get some air in, and through that window she was able to put the red string, but it was not visible inside the house because she was at the very, very end of the city at the wall, and nobody could see what she was doing unless you went outside. And they were all enclosed, they were all frightened, so they didn't go outside the city. The Jews the Israelites had laid siege to the city. And the other thing was, her window was close enough to the ground so that Caleb and Pinchas could go down easily without breaking their bones. Because had she been in the higher part of the city, there would have been too great of a drop, and it would have been too steep for them to go down, and they would have had to climb over the second wall, which of course would have been impossible for them. The very fact that her house was at the outer wall allowed them to escape. And this also explains another thing. If people saw the two spies coming in, why didn't they react more quickly? Why did it take some time between the spies coming in and the king of Jericho reacting and sending messengers to Rachav? The answer is the king and the aristocracy stayed within the upper walls. The people who were the commoners and the poor people were coming in, and they were crowded in the lower walls. And so the spies came in to the area where there were lower walls. But Rachav, being a harlot, had access to the upper crust. And so the spies could find out what was going on in the top part of the city from Rachav, but they were not immediately noticed by the men of the king. It's only they drew some suspicion from the people who lived around it. They didn't recognize them, and they didn't recognize them, and then they decided that they better tell the king and his people, because the king and the people didn't know the farmers either. Remember, this was a major fortified city, and there were families who were living in farmland all around who were related to them, but by no means could they know all of them. But they knew of each other from different areas, but they didn't know everybody, so they could go in, and the spies could go in and behave as if they were just like the other Canaanites. But eventually, the people amongst themselves said, wait a second, who are those people? And nobody knew. And that's when they went to the aristocracy, they went to the king and his men to tell them that they were strangers, that must be spies in the house of Rachav. And because it took a while, because she was living in the lower part of the city, and all of the riffraff were in that part of the city. It was kind of crowded. It took a while till they were able to sort things out and think this through, and then go to the king. The king sent his men, and it took a while till he was able to get through. By the time that happened, Rachav had heard about that people had been talking, and she had concealed them. But this whole scenario, how this worked, was known intimately by the person who wrote this. There's no way, when you see a mound, that you can know all of these things. And so, my friends, I don't know which date the city of Jericho was burned down. But there is no question that whoever wrote the biblical narrative knew things that no man could have known except if you were there yourself and you had privy and access to the godly messages or the innermost conversations of Joshua and Caleb and Pinchas and so on. This by itself, the artifacts, the archaeology itself, actually proves the biblical record. Initially, the Bible critics said it never happened. After finally they agreed that it happened, they say, well, it couldn't have been them, it had to be somebody else because the dates don't match. That's a very, very weak position. Now, I want to tell you something. The scientists say that the biblical account doesn't tell us facts. Scientists talk about facts. But the scientist himself has a conversation with people. And if you want to make it interesting, you have to tell a story. In the biblical story, you get details of what went on in the war, details of what the city was like. And let me tell you something else, that the biblical account is extremely precise. Those familiar with the 5 books of Moses know that events and people and actions are divided into groups of 7. And that every single individual is mentioned exactly 7 times in a particular incident. And the things that he does are mentioned 7 times. And if they're talking about a law, the law is mentioned in 7 different categories, 7 different ways. Every single aspect of the Bible, of the 5 books of Moses, is exact and precise down to its language and to its letter. And that is the greatness of what has been discovered. It's called the biblical codes. And I know, the biblical codes have been disputed and they've been found to be bunk. Baloney, it's been found to be bunk. The biblical codes are exact and precise. You can argue against them, but they are uncannily exact, uncannily precise, and it took years till they were able to even discover any way of questioning their veracity. What did they do? They used Bible against Bible, and that's a discussion for some other time. But the biblical account is precise. The biblical account in the narrative reveals details, and intimate details you could not have known if you were a writer writing several hundred years looking at a tell, looking at a ruin. Good Shabbos.